Hey everyone, welcome to Exploring Health, Macro to Micro. I'm your host, Parker Condit. In this show, I interview health and wellness experts around topics like sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress management, mental health, and much more. So by the end of each episode, you'll have concrete, tangible advice that you can start implementing today to start living a healthier life, either for yourself or for your loved ones. Today, we're actually doing something slightly different. So this is the first episode of a new monthly format called On the Floor, where I actually have a co-host. And the co-host is none other than Danielle Pellicano. So Danielle is a phenomenal trainer and endurance coach, and she's an even better friend. So I'm really excited that we have the opportunity to co-host this segment together from now on. If you want to learn more about Danielle, please check out episode 3, where we did a full episode with her as the guest. I'm in the typical conversational interview style format we've been doing up until this point. The On the Floor segment was sort of born out of the idea that I have not been actively working with clients for a few years now. So a lot of my commentary on health and fitness feels a little bit like armchair criticky. And so you end up losing touch with what's happening in this space if you're not actually on the training floor. But Danielle is on the training floor, and she's been recording people's questions. So each episode, we will play a question. Danielle and I will go back and forth answering from each of our perspectives for about 10 minutes, and we'll do 3 questions per episode. So in this first episode, we're doing 3 questions. The first has to do with pre, during, and post-training fueling for an endurance athlete. The second is asking why people are walking backwards on treadmills. And the third is why some people aren't seeing results when they're working out all the time. So all very good questions and very fun questions for Danielle and I to answer. So the On the Floor segment will be released on the last Monday of each month at 6 a.m., just like all the other episodes. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy the first episode of our monthly On the Floor segment with my co-host, Danielle Pellicano. Danielle, welcome. Welcome back, I should say.
Thank you.
And this is sort of like the inaugural, this is the first episode of a new segment that we're doing here, which is going to be called On the Floor. I've already sort of gone into the premise of that a little bit in the intro. For anyone listening who doesn't know Danielle, we did a full episode just so people could reference it later. That's episode 3. That's already out. So if you want to go check that out and learn more about her, feel free to do that. But you also get a great feel for her personality and expertise through this segment as well.
Fun.
So this episode is the first one we're doing. The plan is to do 3 questions on the floor from people that you know and interact with at Lifetime, where you work part-time. And then we're just going to go through and answer it in as much detail as we think is appropriate. We're thinking probably 10 minutes per question. So that's the proposed format. It's obviously going to evolve, but that's what we're starting with. So perfect. You're going to see us kind of work on the fly here.
Oh, it's so fun.
Do you have anything you want to say before we get started?
No, I'm so excited. This is like where you and I shine. This is Parker and my relationship to a T. We just sit back and we just go at it with different things that people have talked about all week. It's great.
Yeah. All right. Who's this first guy?
So this is Ted, and Ted is 40 years old, big endurance athlete, big cyclist, road cyclist mainly. And I started training him about a year ago and have really changed, in my opinion, kind of his mechanics, I would say. So that was a big part of him, I think, seeking me out more. Was obviously the endurance side was more of a given for him. What we have really been focusing on is strength and conditioning and just bettering his mechanics overall so he would produce more power on the bike and be better at the run.
Okay. Cool. Yeah. And just for context for people listening, just so you know what the 3 questions for this episode are going to be. One of them is coming from an endurance athlete talking about nutrition, pre, post, and pre, during, and post exercise. Another question about stuff people are seeing in the gym, which is walking backwards on a treadmill. And then the third question is somebody asked how are you working out all the time and not seeing results? So we're going to show the videos of each of these questions, but just so you know what the questions are, and then we'll kind of dive into each of them individually. But we're going to start with that first one from Ted.
I'm an endurance athlete, and I'm curious what 3 things to focus on pre, during, and post-workout from a nutrition perspective.
All right. Easy enough. So this is much more your world.
For sure.
I have some notes as far as like the nerd stuff of exactly how many carbs you should probably be taking in. But this is totally not my wheelhouse. So I'll let you kick this one off. And you already gave pretty good backstory on you're working with him, what he's kind of doing, and what he wants to focus on.
For sure. So I always say improved athletic performance is how I am approached for nutrition. I'm not a registered dietitian. I have just been in the field for 20 plus years, and I know from a race standpoint and a replenishment standpoint how to keep the body functioning at its optimal performance when it pertains to endurance. So that is how I'm answering this question for Ted. I think a big misnomer is the fueling windows and timing of foods. I think we can get almost too involved with how we answer questions that we confuse kind of our listeners and our subjects. For Ted specifically, and for a lot of my endurance athletes in that age range, a 2-hour window is optimal prior to endurance-based sports. So what I mean by that is these guys and gals are coming in and they're easily doing over an hour of what I would call heavy fitness, an hour to 2 hours to be exact. So that's their output in the gym most days, and they're probably in there 4 to 5 days a week. So I'm giving you an example of the subject. To simplify, 1 gram of carbs per kilo of body weight is what your fueling should be 2 hours prior. And I would say that is the biggest talking point when it comes to fueling, that most people don't fuel the workout that's about to happen. Most go into it fasted or just don't have the stomach to have anything. So they're coming in and doing their 6 a.m. workouts and they're just under fueled. That, in my opinion, is just setting up the rest of the day for failure, is the best way to describe it. So 1 gram per body weight, I'm 145 pounds. That ends up being about 65 kilos.
I want to hop in just so people can sort of slow down. There's 2.2 pounds per kilo.
Correct.
So like you were giving your body weight. So if you need to find your weight in kilos, take your body weight, divide it by 2.2, and that's going to be your reference number, because we're going to use this reference quite a bit. Most of the research
around, the standard, exactly.
Yeah, most of the research, because the rest of the world does it, right?
Correct.
America's just stupid. But so understanding, like having a general idea of what your body weight is in kilos will be very helpful for probably a lot of shows going forward, but definitely this one.
Absolutely. Okay, so like my magic number is 65. So I multiply everything by 65.
Right. I'm 85.
So. There we go. Perfect. So I know and again, these are baselines, but they're pretty accurate. I'm going to shoot for 65 to 80 grams prior to my workout. I am a huge lover of bananas, a cup of oatmeal, a sweet potato. I bake off like 6 sweet potatoes on a Sunday, and I literally eat them cold. It seems extreme, but it's not. They're delicious, and they're probably your biggest superfood. That little window lets me go into that workout feeling totally topped off. The hydration part as well, 20 ounces of water should be what you are topping your fuel source, especially if you're an endurance person, meaning you're about to go run or you're about to go do a biking workout. The hydration is so key. I would say most people are coming in dehydrated. And once you are dehydrated, it leads to lower blood volume. You have an elevated heart rate. So a lot of misnomers, or people think they're unfit or they're overtraining. Yes, that could be a part of it, but a lot of the time they're coming in dehydrated, so their heart rate's already elevated. You're going to be putting out so much more effort with very little return. So dehydration is a massive one. And I almost feel like, as terrible as it is, I can hammer that point all day long. Almost everyone comes in dehydrated.
On the hydration point, yes. So my first 2 notes that I had, hydrate with electrolytes, and then number 2 was carbs, exclamation point. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm glad we're on the same page with that. And then on the hydration point, if you feel thirsty, it's too late. So
it is.
It's one of those weird things where it's like you have to be very proactive with it. And then have you ever used like the P test to kind of get people to titrate how much they're drinking throughout a day?
So in our language right now, it's the sweat test. And the only reason I say it is they're so accessible. And I'm realizing that predominantly in my male athletes, they are so under fueled from a sodium standpoint that it is affecting their training exponentially. And it is out of my scope, meaning I outsource that to nutritionists that do sweat tests that get my athletes dialed in, knowing exactly the levels they should be hitting. If you are not making up those differences, you are sabotaging every workout.
Okay. Yep. All right. So hydration with sodium, electrolytes for sure. Okay. So that's pre.
So during,
Yep.
During, it's 10 ounces it's 10 ounces of hydration, ideally every 20 minutes. So if you think about it, you're like, whoa. So you're trying to get me to drink 32 ounces in an hour. That's not likely. And that's a high benchmark. However, if you could even just go into it topped off, and you are finishing a bottle an hour, that's the best little I give to my clients. I'm like, if you can finish a bottle an hour, you're doing your part. in your water should always have electrolytes. I prefer you have electrolytes with carbs. Like Element is a great sodium, potassium, magnesium drink that's like the hot topic right now, but it has no calories. That is a great topper in the morning to get your hydration where it needs to be. But during your workout, you have to have some carbohydrates. I would say like 5% of what you're drinking should be carbs at the time.
Do you have a threshold for, again, we're just speaking purely, mostly for an endurance athlete and like not somebody who enjoys running, like
Correct.
They're doing a lot of
totally get it.
So how much do you have a carb threshold? Again, referencing like grams per kilogram of body weight?
I focus more on calories, to be fair, because I feel like it's an easier numeric for people to grab. Why I say that is because of the endurance bars that we have available, for the goos that we take, for the honey stingers. Those have become such snacks that my endurance people carry that I give them more of a caloric number ceiling to hit versus even carbohydrate. So with that being said, from a caloric standpoint, I'm always saying I want you to have at least 100 to 200 calories on you that you're getting in within that hour.
Okay. And that's for like a limited time domain. It's going to be different if you're talking about like a race day, right?
Correct.
Okay. So again, just talking about sort of a training session in the 1 to 2 hour time domain.
Definitely.
And then post,
we hammer protein. It's all post nutrition is about recovery. It's how do we recover the body best so that we can give our next workout 120%. Protein, 15 to 25 grams has to be ingested within that 30-minute window. And that's where we've come so far with recovery drinks, where you can have them in your backpack, you drop them in your water, you shake it. It's not even a meal. It's literally just something that becomes habitual, and then you eat on top of that within the next hour. 1.5 grams per kilo of body weight is typically what you want within a 30-minute window. So that puts you back at like the 80 grams. That would be me being 145 pounds for carbs. Correct.
Okay.
And then this is a huge one. For water, you want 24 ounces for every pound you lost. This is getting a little on the nerdy side, but it's not, because this is where like so many endurance athletes start to just question their training, when in fact they're just always at a deficit or they're always lacking in something. If you're a huge sweater, I'm a huge sweater. I can do a workout in an hour and I can I could start at 148. I can weigh myself again. I'm at 144 pounds. That is a 4-pound loss in just water weight. In order to even get your body back to where it needs to be recovered for the next workout, you need to be drinking 24 ounces for every 1 pound that you lost. And once you start learning that, those things are very important to pay attention to.
Yeah. So the example you gave, you're referencing almost a gallon. So 96 ounces, right? I'm
not saying that has to be done in an hour, but that should be what I'm rehydrating with within a day. I mean, we're telling people to drink 90 to 100, whether they're sedentary or even active, right? Now tap on an endurance athlete who's, in my opinion, I'm sorry, but they're working like a little harder than the average Joe in the gym. I mean, they're full tilt out of the gate for 60 to 120 minutes. 100 ounces would be a minimum.
Yep. Okay. So for the notes that I had here, a lot of the research around, this is more specific to protein, and this is probably something we're going to get into, I think, in a later episode, but just to touch on it now, a lot of the research now coming out around nutritional timing with protein, people can get so, particular about it. For the most part, if you're hitting your protein thresholds in a given day, that's the most important thing, much more than the specific timing windows. But again, those are generally done in Gen Pop populations. So you're speaking about your expertise in endurance athletes. So that's why you're giving that 30-minute window. But if you're not a high-end endurance athlete, and you always hear this thing about the anabolic window after you work out, if you're just hitting your protein thresholds in a 24-hour window, that for most Gen Pop people, that's what you need to care about.
Correct.
A lot of people get so hung up on, I missed my anabolic window. It's like, you're not a bodybuilder. Like, this isn't your job. Stop caring about it. And then, so for endurance athletes, I'm curious to hear what you have to say about this, but protein thresholds throughout a given day. Again, we're going to reference in terms of grams per kilogram of body weight. 1.2 to 1.4 is generally acceptable on the endurance side, except if you're doing higher volume, you can go all the way up to 1.6. So I think I had some numbers for myself here.
I would say 0.6 to 0.8 is what Gen Pop are hitting if they're lucky.
Yeah, so I think the RDA is generally 0.8.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've never recommended that to anyone ever. Again, it's just a minimum. Correct. So for endurance, so for me as 85 kilograms, 1.2, I need to be getting 102 grams of protein per day. Yeah. If we go to the upper thresholds of 1.6, this is for endurance. That puts me around 136 grams per day of protein.
That's correct.
Just to give people some examples.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I had anything else on that. Did you?
No, that was perfect.
Okay, great.
I think
thanks for the question.
Thanks, Ted.
Yeah.
I've never seen that guy walk in the gym with a gallon in his hand after he listens to this episode. I bet you. I'm going to take a picture.
Yeah. Hopefully that was helpful.
1,000%.
All right. So we're going to jump to the next question. And this one is talking more about why are people walking backwards on treadmills?
Saw it again this morning.
It's a great question.
Hey there. So why are people walking backwards on the treadmill?
Short and sweet.
This is Steve. Steve's great.
All right, Steve, thanks for the question. I think this probably, I don't know if you do this, but if you see things on social media and you try to dig into when they started getting popular and trying to figure out where it came from. Have you tried to do that with this one?
If I hear knees over toes one more time, I'm going to...
Knees over toes, guys.
This is us, you and me, see? You and me, we just know. Hold on, I have to start, okay? Because one, I'm very matter of fact. Shocker. The walking backwards on the treadmill, I am learned over time not to totally be a naysayer about something that's awkwardly going on in the gym. There could be a total reason why. You might have been given it by your physical therapist. You might have a training goal that really requires it. So I'm not poo-pooing the walking backwards on the treadmill. However, if you don't have a true meaning or understanding why you're doing it, I don't find it necessary. Point one. My next point. I think it could be a great warm-up tool to leg day. If you want to hop on that treadmill backwards for 5 minutes at a 6 to 8% incline, being able to walk without holding on, which is usually around the 2.5 miles an hour, is a good benchmark. It does fire up the quads. It does fire up the hamstrings. It is low bearing on the knees. For that, I'm like, cool, go for it. I think walking backwards, I'm a big trail runner. I think anything that can improve knee stability and control are great modalities. However, if there isn't an injury that's making me having to do that, I would far rather see people doing sled pushes and pulls in the gym to actually maximize knee health. I'm going to leave that point and let you hop in on what you think of that.
Yeah, I had a few similar points. One of them being, it was the specificity that you brought up, right? If you have a specific reason to be doing this, it totally makes sense. This is a very common protocol coming out of PT for total knee replacements, a lot of knee injuries for people who are dealing with lack of ankle mobility, specifically dorsiflexion. If people are watching, if you're listening to this, sorry. If you're watching, so it's when your foot is sort of being pulled up towards your shin. That's dorsiflexion. When it's pointing away, that's plantar flexion, sort of on the toe off phase of gait. So if you lack a certain amount of dorsiflexion, it can be useful for that. If you lack good tools for hip extension, it can be good for that. But again, these are very specific things that are going to be coming from a practitioner based on a diagnosis or based on a treatment that you need. If people the volume, I think, of people doing this based versus the amount of probably need, I think is outweighing right now. So there's just way too many people doing this just because it's been seen online. And the idea, there were some other claims, because I had to go on TikTok to actually see why this is happening, what people are saying about this, right? Because I'm not on the floor, which is the point of this. So some of the other claims that I saw, knee pain, big one, stability and balance. That one seems unusual for me. It's you're putting people on an elevated platform who lack stability and balance. I don't understand the safety mechanism there. when there's so many other things that you can be doing for stability and balance?
If it pertains to runners specifically, it is extremely stressing on the joint trail running, descending and ascending. It just is.
Yep.
If you lack the ability to be in the element to train in your sport where you intend on racing, I can understand again where some of these modalities come into play. I do. But I would never prescribe an athlete of mine to walk on the treadmill backwards for more than like 10 minutes. It just, you have to go out, like go find the hill, go find the stairs. You have to make it more race-like. So I do think that's an important point to make. I just feel like there's a place for the gym, and I love the gym, especially given certain climates. But when in fact you could go and be in the actual element of which your sport is intended, that is always going to be the number one.
So the other things I said, I used to use backwards walking and backwards movement in general a ton in warm-ups. I think it's very helpful for people who lack mobility, just because everyone's sort of always forward ambulation. So kind of getting them moving backwards just without having to be too specific just fixes some stuff, right? I would routinely have people do backwards marching and cross connecting. So if you're walking backwards, you're lifting the left knee up, you're trying to connect the right elbow, kind of reaching across the body. That reciprocal motion, anything reciprocal is great in warm-ups. Reverse lunges, if people have the capacity to do that in a warm-up. And then backwards skipping as well, if people have the ability to skip and go backwards.
Agreed.
So it's not like I'm against backwards music.
Of course.
Movement. It's just like, but I would use it very specifically and it would take 90 seconds of a 12-minute warm-up, right? So it was very specifically programmed for a reason, just blindly. I saw some people suggesting doing it for 20 to 60 minutes, which seems insane. So my main point out of this was like the claims that are being presented as to why you should do this. I think if you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing, there are much better ways to use your time. And you can just achieve the same things much, much easier. Specifically for knee pain, like, what's really great for, I'm not going to say injury prevention because that's like a tricky term, but like in knee health is having really strong quads, really strong hamstrings and glutes. It is having really strong legs. And if you want that, you're probably going to have to load them. And, walking backwards is, if you're extremely deconditioned and untrained, you're going to get some sort of response out of it, but it's such a low load. That's why, like you mentioned, sled pushes, sled pulls, great way to load those things, and then just doing regular stuff, knee extensions, split squats, whatever you can handle, essentially. I think I did have one more note, but did you have anything else you want to say on that idea?
I don't really prescribe backward walking on the treadmill very much.
Shocking.
And I was tempted to just go up to people that are doing it and asking them why, but in a very nice way, because I'm actually quite curious. So I think that will also be a follow-up to this.
Yeah. So yeah, if you end up doing that, maybe we'll just end up doing a series of you interviewing people walking backwards on the treadmill. Mm-hmm. Okay. So if there's any other follow-up questions about walking backwards on the treadmill, feel free to let us know and we'll kind of loop this back into another episode.
That would be great.
All right. Third one, last question for this particular show. We'll get going.
How is it that you work out all the time and for some reason you're not seeing results?
Great question.
I get this a lot.
I can imagine. I think my first talking point on this is that, you and I, we probably hype up exercise so much, and I think we should, because it's like, if you could bottle something up into a pill to fix like almost everything, it would be exercise, and it would be like the most prescribed pill of all time, right? It would crush statins, it would crush Ozempic. It, like, the benefits exercise can offer, it's like there's not a panacea for health, but exercise is about as close as you can get.
Correct.
With that being said, you can't only address exercise. There's other things to address, and I have a short list, which is nutrition, sleep, daily physical activity. I will define how that's different from exercise, stress management, and healthy relationships.
And just to be fair, Parker and I don't know each other's talking points prior to these episodes, so this just shows even more of our alignment, because mine is very similar.
Okay. So just like understanding that there's all these pillars. I think there's going to be certain times in your life where you're more focused on one than the other, but like you always have to be at least thinking about all of them. So like, and most people, they gravitate towards the ones that they like, right? Focusing on, and like, if you think of this another way, like focusing on physical health through exercise is easier to quantify and address for a lot of people than like, I don't know, emotional health. That's harder for some people. So that's where like healthy relationships and stress management comes in. So people gravitate towards the things that they like and they want to do. And you do hear so much about the benefits of exercise, but there are these other factors where it's like your nutrition is going to play a major role. If you're not sleeping enough, it's really hard to get any sort of benefit across any of these domains if you're not sleeping enough. Daily physical activity, which is essentially walking. Walking is the metric that we're going to use to measure daily physical activity, but it's really anything that's like just ambulation throughout the day. It can be washing dishes. It's anything that's not sitting and doing nothing, and it's anything that's not standing and doing nothing. So it can be a lot of your day. But the point I was trying to make with daily physical activity is that you can work out for an hour, 3 or 4 days a week, and still be sedentary.
Yes.
And a lot of people are.
So a good point. That was one of my points. Go ahead.
And that's why when I list off those 6 pillars, I identify a difference between daily physical activity and exercise. Because foundationally, I always try to get people to build a foundation of daily physical activity. And it's like, you do that no matter what. You exercise a few days a week too, but you always have your daily physical activity, because if you lose the habit of exercise, which when life gets hectic is one of the things to drop off pretty quickly for a lot of people, you still have the daily physical activity. So there's sort of like layers to these things. But the point is that there's a lot of interplay, there's a lot of overlap between those particular pillars. And if you're only hammering the exercise pillar, but everything else is sort of neglected, or it can just be one that's really low, you're probably not going to be getting the results that you want. There's a variety of other factors too, but I'll let you hop in at that point.
Oh, thank you. I'm a big fan of takeaways, meaning, again, I feel like you almost can numb our audience by just saying all of the different things that make up a cohesive wellness package, we'll call it, right? To the point where it's like, okay, but like, what's my takeaway? Where's my magic pill? I like to give small incremental goals. So we talk about sleep. You've always called that my superpower. It's a fact. I don't think I've been able to perform at the way in which I have personally, like in my own sport, but also professionally. Like this business is long days, early mornings, a lot of energy. The fact that I could sleep, but I prioritize sleep. So the 10-3-2-1 that you guys mentioned in your last podcast was fantastic. So people are like, what's that? Shutting down the caffeine window 10 hours before your projected sleep time. Also kind of staying on the same plan as your kids even would be great. You put them to bed the same time every night, or at least you try and hope so. You as an adult also need to be on some type of program like that, where you are like, I'm shutting it down at 8:30, 9 o'clock, and you stick to that routine as best you can. Then you do the math. 10 hours prior to that, you try to limit your caffeine window. The 3 is trying not to eat 3 hours prior to sleep. And if you're a late eater, you're a snacker, your goal is to go to protein as much as you can. Try to grab protein. The 2 was just shutting down your workload, meaning actually responding to emails, looking at your computer. That's not the same as screen time. It's like literally still being just connected to your work, shutting that down 2 hours prior.
Really mentally on.
You have to. And then the screen is 1 hour. If you can get in the habit of truly being in your bed with a book, fantastic. And then with the sleep chamber, I love that. It is a sleep chamber. It's got to be super dark, and it's got to be I think my perfect temp is like 69 degrees. And I know that's like that that's just the sleep category. And I start all my people there. I'm like, if you're not even checking the 10-3-2-1 is if you're already people like us that already don't have issues sleeping, then you can start working on the 10-3-2-1. For a lot of people, I think just prioritizing when is your bedtime and doing all the things to shut down that mind of yours prior to it is going to be a massive takeaway. Because if you lack sleep, you're going into everything under your eating habits become poor. They just do. You crave more calories to stay awake. So now you most likely start to overeat. So all those things come into play. Do you agree?
Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. The other thing I'm starting to realize, and this is mostly geared towards women, there is a point where you have to have a blood panel drawn often. Not often, like I'm saying every 6 months to a year. You might have a different response on that. Knowing where your hormones are at and where your blood level and all of that is at is so important. Why I say that is I'm not trying to just push hormone replacement on people, but it is such a hot topic amongst my 40 plus clientele that I can't pinpoint it. It's not like I could see it on you. It's something that has to be tested for, because you will be beating yourself against a wall if you are deficient in something that you're never going to be able to make up for in the gym or in eating habits and things like that. That is something that's really important in my opinion.
Yep. I had that as a note as well. Hormones being a major factor, it's trickier for women, even pre-menopause. If you're on birth control, that's going to provide a lot of variability. Perimenopause, menopause, pregnancy, all of those things are going to have huge implications. A previous guest, Kristen Mallon, episode 5, if you want to check that out, she runs a women-specific longevity like concierge practice. And she suggested that all women get a baseline hormone panel at least 35. She's like, earlier would be better, but 35 is going to get you a good baseline, because then you can measure against and actually see if things are changing over the next 10, 15 years. And you have a good baseline to work off of. And that's very important for a practitioner. There's a whole host of other issues in that space, in sort of a lack of guidance from who's actually quarterbacking that care. Is it a primary? Is it an OBGYN? Are there enough OBGYNs specifically trained in menopause care? No. So there's a whole host of issues around that as well. I was going to say, one of the other notes that I had, a lot of times people will become like habitual exercisers, and the training is no longer creating the signal. Like the signal to noise ratio is no longer good enough. And you're kind of just, not going to say going through the motions, but the stimulus is not enough to create the response that you want. Like, you're just not training hard enough. I'm not saying this woman is specifically, but that ends up being very common. And then also the law of diminishing returns, where, you know, in the first 2 years of starting an exercise routine, the results are awesome, because if you're going from untrained to training, you're just going to get crazy results for the first 2 years. And then it very much tapers off, and it's largely just like maintenance, and you have to do a ton of work for really incremental progress from that point on. So it's just something else to call out, that the progress you see in the first 2 years of training is not going to be the same of consistent training beyond that 2-year mark, even really the 6 month mark.
To that point, I do find it, again, back to data, and just, I know people are like, how so many more tests and this and that. Data doesn't lie. I do think it's important. If you're someone that is routinely, this speaks a lot to Lifetime's model as well, which is fantastic. We offer AMA testing. It's an active metabolic test where you're finding your VO2 max, and then you're also finding your heart rate zones. To really have those dialed in matters. I think Garmin does a great job. We've talked about that in the episode we recorded earlier. I do think, you know, the numbers get pretty close if you wear it long enough and you're doing enough different stressors to actually give it enough to go based off of. But to have a test done, why I say that is, living in zone 2 is the big conversation. Fat burning, fat burning, fat burning. I don't disagree that zone 2 is not important. I feel none of us really ever sit in zone 2. Everyone's in zone 3. And that small difference is a big difference, because that is where you start to plateau. You plateau on your physiological look, you plateau on your aerobic capacity, all of it. Zone 4 and 5 is something I can't almost hammer enough of to my 35 plus crew. I think we all do a lovely job staying in 2 and 3. I think really pushing 4 and 5 throughout the week is really where the group environment and going to the gym is probably your biggest bang for the buck, because it's work that you typically don't want to do on your own. Those different stressors are going to put a different stress on the body. You're going to go from just fat burning to now going carb burning, which is important. So your metabolism is just going to start kicking in differently. You are going to have a different composition, meaning look, if you stick to certain regimens that are like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. It's the idea of keeping your highs high and your lows low, from an intensity standpoint. I have a great example of this, especially by the time this will come out. We're recording this right at the end of 2023. I set out a goal to run 1,000 miles this year. I'm going to cross that later today.
Oh, good.
So 1,000. Yeah. So a ton of volume. Thanks. So like a ton of volume, right? But it was all slow.
Yes.
It was all slow. So my VO2 max, so 1,000 miles, that's so much running volume. I basically didn't strength train this year because I was just like, I had to run every day. My VO2 max went from, on my Garmin, so whatever, there's going to be a little bit of variation. It went from like 52 at the beginning of 2023. It's now at 53. It didn't change because I never did anything above zone 3. I probably did 10 fast miles all year. I just didn't run fast because I was always just in that low, slow zone. And I was already pretty well conditioned.
Yeah.
Like as my base is concerned in zone 2. So like if you're just living in that low zone 2, zone 3, and you're never really pushing. But like, could you imagine like if you were training me to optimize actual endurance performance and I put in 1,000 miles of volume, like my VO2 max should be over 60.
Yes, but so that's such a loaded response only from the standpoint. So Krista, the woman whose question it's from, she's not an endurance athlete. She's like your textbook, comes to the gym, mom, awesome. I think she looks great, but it doesn't matter what I think. You know what I mean? She's someone that comes in and busts her ass, but she's busting her ass an hour a day and then is running her kids and doing her normal life. Correct. That goes back to being, how are you being active positively throughout the rest of the day? That is where step count comes in. We talk about that all the time. It's the only metric I look at for my own self throughout the day. Isn't that interesting? Like that one, and you're like, what? I already run and I already work out and I luckily like how I look and feel. The sedentary, if I see only 6,000, 7,000 a day, that was Danielle like on a very chill day.
Right.
And that to me is a motivator where I'm like, oh my gosh, if I don't hit at least 14,000 steps in a day, for me, that is very undervolumed.
Yeah.
That, and I know for a fact, plays into me being able to maintain the body weight that I've always kind of stayed consistent at. Because my training as well has highs and lows. When I'm at the peak of my coaching, my personal volume, it lessens. I don't feel bad saying it. It's a fact. My clients take priority and I'm working so much that I just eat better and focus more on sleep. That's the tools that you need to be taking away from some of these things. You can't outwork a bad diet. The little habits that you start putting together all matter. The gym has its place. I say you find what you enjoy and you do that, but then utilize the gym and some of those classes that are being offered that puts you in a position of discomfort, because that is going to challenge you differently. And sometimes that's the only nugget you really need to start seeing a shift. And then we have to hammer protein again. If you really want to see a difference in composition and body fat, you have to be hitting 1.3, in my opinion. And that's a lot. Like if women do the math and the men, it's a fair amount. Like you're not getting it just by eating like 20 chicken breasts a day. You're going to have to introduce protein shakes of some kind. That's a good thing you should speak on that just to close this out. How are you getting and hitting that amount of protein?
I don't do protein shakes, but I have 3 large meals, and protein is the base of it. I don't really care about carbs, and I know that's like a very privileged thing to say, but I just focus on my protein intake and make sure I hit that. I'll eat right. I'm not like anti-carb or anything like that, but I'm just like, I've been very lucky to not have like a weird relationship with food. I have other weird relationships with myself. But so I just focus on protein. I eat kind of however many carbs my body tells me I should, whatever feels full. And then I just kind of backfill fats. But yeah, I'm kind of in like the 1.4 to 1.6 range pretty consistently throughout the year. So it's pretty high, but it's going to be like a large amount of food, especially for people who are sort of scared of protein or have not eaten a lot of protein consistently. And just to give people like a frame of reference, I eat 6 eggs every morning, and 6 eggs is only getting you, I say only, but that's like 40 to 45 grams of protein. All right. So that alone is it's less than a third. It's about a third of what I need in a given day. So a lot of people are eating like 2 eggs in the morning. They're like high protein, right? But it's like, it's 7 grams per egg. So it's only 14 grams. If you need 100 in a given day, you're still at a big deficit after breakfast. So it's always my priority when I'm like structuring a meal. It's like, how much protein is in this?
And then not to just branch off into what's probably a whole nother podcast, lifting heavier it's funny because we're so inundated in our industry, meaning you and I, with information that pertains to fitness, I just assume everyone knows some of this stuff sometimes. You know what I mean? I realize it's still what you choose to seek out. I will say the biggest takeaway we could give listeners that are in their 20s and 30s, men and women, but lately I'm gearing things more towards women. Sorry, gentlemen, but it's just, I think the science is different, period. You can get away in your 20s and 30s with lighter weight, higher reps, resistance training. It's great, which is a lot of the classes at Lifetime that I teach, right? It's just what it is. You pivot when you are in your post 35, especially in your 40s. I can't encourage women to be lifting more and heavier. Not saying you can't still go to bar class and do the stuff that's more toning based, and that's always been what it is, and I get it. Add that in 1 day a week. 3 times a week, you need to be lifting 6 to 8 rep maxes. You have to. And I actually think that's like a gift. And I almost think that is a bigger exercise takeaway than even the cardio, which I can't believe I'm saying, but now I'm in my mid-40s and I see it though. I do. I totally see it. If I actually want to change my body composition or I actually want to tone, if I don't lift heavy, I personally don't see much of a result.
Yeah, and to kind of speak on that, and we're just giving so much time to this last question, but it's an interesting one. So, talking about what you're speaking to is strength and muscle mass. To put on muscle mass, it used to be like pretty well established. You need to be working in like the 8 to 12 rep range. It's come out that rep range doesn't really matter. What matters is your proximity to failure. So you can be doing, and the lower reps you're doing, the more accurate you have to be. The higher reps you're doing, there's a little bit more leeway. And I'll kind of give an example of that. If you're doing 6 reps of something and you finish that set and you maybe could have done 7, that's a very close proximity to failure. Like if you tried 7, you maybe failed, you can definitely see failure, right? It's within your sight line. If you could have done 12, you're not even close, right? You would have been 50% to failure. So that's what I mean with proximity to failure. If you do 20 reps and you maybe could have done 24, that's probably also within a proximity to failure. So the rep range matters less. It's just how close to that range of failure you're getting. And the lower reps you're doing, the more accurate you have to be. The higher rep range you're doing, there's a little bit more leeway. The 8 to 12 rep range was just so common and accurate just because people can consistently get to that proximity to failure in that rep range. So it's less about the reps that you're doing, it's how close you're getting to failure. So really we're speaking about intensity.
Great.
Because each set is going to be challenging. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
It was a very good answer.
I have nothing else on that.
I don't either. I think that was really good.
Okay. Fun questions. This is a fun first episode. So we're going to be doing, these are going to be coming out. I think I'm already going over this in the intro, but these are going to be coming out the last Monday of every month. However that works out. This first one in January, we'll be doing one every month. So additional questions will be coming in. We're still just going to be doing them with you recording, people in Lifetime, in Minneapolis. I think at some point we'll open it up to wider audiences, but for right now, I love just doing it where you can just go and talk to these people and be like, hey, your answer's coming out at the end of 100%. January. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Danielle.
Thanks, Parker.
Hey, everyone. That's all for today's show. I want to thank you so much for stopping by and watching, especially if you've made it all the way to this point. If you'd like to be notified when new episodes are going to be released, feel free to subscribe and make sure you hit the bell button as well. To learn more about today's guest, feel free to look in the description. You can also visit the podcast website, which is exploringhealthpodcast.com. That website will also be linked in the description. As always, likes, shares, comments are a huge help to me and to this channel and to the show. So any of that you can do, I would really appreciate. And again, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.